The sound was unmistakable, even from 100 yards away. A sharp metallic snap, followed by the grating clink of a heavy chain hitting gravel. It was 6:42 a.m. The mountain air was still and cold, carrying the noise with perfect clarity to the porch where I sat. My coffee, held in a thick ceramic mug my wife Eleanor had made decades ago, stopped halfway to my lips. I lowered it slowly, deliberately, and watched. Down at the base of my long, winding driveway where the asphalt met the county road, a figure was wrestling with my gate. It was a woman, silhouetted against the rising sun, her movements jerky and aggressive. She was using a pair of bolt cutters, the long handles giving her the leverage she needed. Another snap echoed up the hill. I didn't move. I just sat there in the old wicker chair that had seen 27 years of mountain sunrises, and I took a sip of my coffee. It was black, no sugar. The bitterness was a familiar comfort. Below me, the woman, Karen Peterson, president of the Black Creek Vistas Homeowners Association, finally succeeded in cutting the last link of the logging chain I had secured the night before. She threw the two severed pieces aside with a gesture of theatrical triumph, as if she had just liberated a captured city. Then she and the man with her, a nervous-looking fellow in a branded polo shirt I recognized as the HOA's hired maintenance guy, began to heave the heavy iron gate open. I took another sip of coffee. I had been expecting this. Not the bolt cutters. Perhaps that was a new level of audacity, even for her, but the confrontation it had been building for months, like a pressure ridge in a slow-moving glacier. I had watched her consolidate power in the development at the foot of my mountain, watched her turn a quiet community of retirees and weekenders into her own personal fiefdom, all through the sheer force of her personality and an encyclopedic knowledge of other people's minor transgressions. I had seen the letters, the fines, the public shamings at community meetings over the height of someone's grass or the color of their mailbox. I had stayed out of it. My property, a 160-acre parcel my grandfather had bought in 1958, was not, and had never been, part of the Black Creek Vistas HOA. My land was the mountain. Their development was a small 30-acre bite taken out of the valley floor beside it. We were neighbors, geographically speaking, but in no other sense. She saw me then. She pointed up the hill, a short, stabbing gesture, and started marching up the driveway. The maintenance man lingered by the violated gate, looking deeply uncomfortable. He clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Karen, however, looked energized, her face flushed with righteousness. She was a woman who fed on conflict. I remained seated, my posture unchanged. I placed my mug on the small wooden table beside me, its surface weathered to a soft gray. I waited. It took her a full 2 minutes to make it up the steep grade. She was breathing heavily when she finally stood on the flagstones of my patio, her hands on her hips. She was wearing expensive athletic wear, the kind designed to suggest a life of vigorous, purposeful activity. "This is your only warning," she said, not as a greeting, but as a proclamation. "You do not have the right to block a public access road, this road." She swept her arm back down the driveway. "Is HOA common property. It has been used by residents for years. You are illegally impeding access to 40 private properties and creating a serious public safety hazard." I said nothing. I simply looked at her. I noted the way she stood, the way she projected her voice, the way she had framed her statement in quasi-legal terms. It was a performance, and she was its star. She had an audience of one, but she played it as if she were addressing a packed auditorium. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any argument would have. "Did you hear me?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I am the president of the Black Creek Vistas HOA. We have a legally established prescriptive easement. If you ever lock that gate again, I will have the sheriff remove it permanently, and the association will bill you for the labor. We will place a lien on your property for the amount, plus administrative fees and penalties. Do you understand? I picked up my phone from the table. The screen was black. I angled it slightly, and she could see her own reflection in the dark glass. A small red light was blinking in the upper corner. I had been recording since she first laid the bolt cutters on my chain. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, a flicker of something other than pure, self-assured indignation crossed her face. It wasn't fear. It was annoyance, as if she had just discovered a small technical flaw in an otherwise perfect plan. I have your statement on record, I said. My voice was quiet, calm. It felt unnaturally loud in the morning stillness. You have identified yourself as Karen Peterson, president of the Homeowners Association. You have stated your belief that this road is HOA common property. You have admitted to destroying my private property, the chain in. You have threatened to do so again. You have also threatened to place an illegal lien on my land. I stood up slowly. I am not a large man, but I am tall, and standing on the porch, I was a few feet above her. You are trespassing, I said, still in that same measured tone. This is the only warning you will receive. Leave my property now. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing for a moment without sound. The script she had rehearsed in her head had no lines for this response. She expected yelling, threats, an emotional, chaotic argument she could win through sheer volume and aggression. She did not know how to handle quiet, documented facts. Finally, she found her voice. You'll be hearing from our lawyer, she spat, turning on her heel. She marched back down the driveway, her expensive sneakers crunching on the gravel. I watched her go. I watched her get back into her oversized SUV and drive through the open gate, followed by the maintenance man in his little truck. I stayed on the porch until the sound of their engines faded, leaving only the chirping of the morning birds. Then I went back to my chair, picked up my now lukewarm coffee, and took a long, slow sip. She had no idea. She had no idea of the avalanche she had just triggered with her cheap bolt cutters and her loud, empty words. She thought this was a battle of wills. She had no idea it was a battle of documents, and that she had just brought a knife to a library fight. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain how we got here. It wasn't just about a road. It was never just about a road. It was about lines on a map and the promises those lines represent. My connection to this land is written in ink and bound in county record books stretching back over 60 years. My grandfather, Arthur Sr., bought this quarter section in 1958. He was a surveyor, a man who believed the world could be understood and ordered through precise measurements and clearly defined boundaries. He bought it for the trees and the creek and the view from the summit, a panoramic vista of the entire valley. He paid cash, and the deed was recorded on a Tuesday in May. I still have the original, the paper thick and fibrous, the typewritten letters faint but perfectly legible. I am also Arthur. I am a civil engineer, recently retired. For 40 years my world was hydrology, soil mechanics, and land development regulations. I designed sewer systems and water mains, graded roads, and wrote stormwater pollution prevention plans. My job was to translate the abstract lines of a surveyor's map into the concrete and steel reality of a functioning community. I understood, in a way few people do, how fragile the boundary is between a developed parcel and a wild one. It's a line defined by permits, easements, setbacks, and 1,000 pages of municipal code. For me, property rights aren't a political slogan. They are a professional creed. They are the foundation of everything we build. My wife, Eleanor, loved this mountain more than anyone. After my grandfather passed, we built our house here, on the very spot where he had dreamed of putting a small cabin. We raised our son here. After Eleanor got sick, this porch was her sanctuary. She would sit in the wicker chair, wrapped in a blanket, and watch the seasons change on the slopes. After she was gone, the quiet and the order of this place were all I had left. I had my routines, I had my peace, I bothered no one, and I expected the same in return. The Black Creek Vistas development was built in the late 90s, long after our house was established. The developer was a reasonable man. He approached me before he even broke ground. He showed me his plans. He was carving out 30 acres at the base of the mountain next to the county road. His plat map clearly showed his property line ending a full 50 feet from the base of my driveway. The long, winding road that led from the county road up to my house was, and always had been, entirely on my parcel. It was my driveway. He understood that. We signed a simple, one-page temporary access agreement, allowing his construction vehicles to use the first 100 feet of my driveway to access a staging area. The agreement was for 24 months, and it expired in 1999. I still have the notarized original in my files. For years, there were no problems. The residents were mostly quiet folks. Some of them would walk up the lower part of my road for exercise. I didn't mind. They were respectful. They waved. They kept their dogs on leashes. It was a classic case of permissive use. I was allowing it, but I had not granted them any right to it. In the eyes of the law, this is a critical distinction. Permissive use, no matter how long it continues, can never ripen into a prescriptive easement. An easement by prescription requires the use to be hostile and adverse, meaning it's done without the owner's permission. By implicitly permitting their walks, I was, ironically, protecting my ownership. Then, about 3 years ago, Karen Peterson and her husband bought one of the houses. They were from out of state, flush with cash from selling some tech company. They saw Black Creek Vistas not as a quiet community, but as an underperforming asset. Within a year, Karen had gotten herself elected to the HOA board. Within 2, she was president. And that's when things began to change. Her first move was to rewrite the covenants. She introduced dozens of new rules governing everything from the approved species of garden flowers to the maximum number of guests a resident could have at their home. Fines were levied for the smallest infractions. She created an architectural review committee, which consisted of herself and 2 of her allies, that had the power to approve or deny any exterior modification to a home, no matter how minor. People who had lived there for 20 years were suddenly being fined because their trim paint was a shade of beige that Karen had deemed inauspicious. I watched from a distance. I started a file. I called it the Karen file. It was a simple manila folder. Every time I heard about a new incident, I would make a note of it. I spoke to old neighbors. One of them, a retired teacher named Mr. Henderson, was fined $200 because his garden hose was not coiled in a visually pleasing manner. He showed me the letter. I made a photocopy and put it in my file. I kept the receipts, so to speak, of her escalating tyranny. I paid my own HOA dues for a small, unbuildable sliver of land I owned adjacent to their entrance for buffer, even though I didn't have to. I paid them on time every time, just to have a record of my official, if distant, relationship with their organization. I wanted a paper trail. In my line of work, you learn that the person with the best paper trail always wins. The real trouble started about 18 months ago. Karen's big project, her legacy, was to unlock the value of the HOA's common areas. Specifically, a 10-acre parcel of wooded land at the back of their development which abutted my property. Her grand vision was to build 40 luxury rental cabins for the tourist market. The problem, as any competent engineer or surveyor could have told her, was access. The parcel was landlocked. The only way to get to it from the main road was up my driveway. She never spoke to me, not once. She didn't call. She didn't write a letter. She didn't knock on my door. She simply acted as if my road belonged to her. She must have looked at the situation and seen a quiet old man living alone on a big piece of land. She probably saw a pushover. She saw my past tolerance of the occasional walker, not as neighborly accommodation, but as a forfeiture of my rights. She had no idea. She assumed that because people had used it, they had a right to it. It's a common and legally fatal mistake. So, she pushed the cabin project through the HOA board. She presented a budget that was based on using the existing access road, which was my driveway. She hired contractors. And for the last year, I've had to endure an endless parade of concrete mixers, lumber trucks, and construction crews driving up and down my private road. I documented every single one. I took photographs. I recorded license plate numbers. I logged dates and times. I sent a polite, formal letter to the HOA board via certified mail stating that the road was private property and that their construction traffic constituted trespass. I included a copy of my deed and the relevant section of the county plat map. The response I received was a letter from Karen, on official HOA letterhead. It was condescending and dismissive. It stated that their lawyers had thoroughly reviewed the matter and had concluded that the HOA had a well-established and undeniable prescriptive easement due to decades of continuous and uninterrupted use by the community. It was nonsense. Legally speaking, but it was written with such authority that it probably convinced her entire board. I put her letter in my file. It was a crucial piece of evidence. It was a written admission that they knew I was the owner, but were choosing to use the road against my express, written wishes. They had just handed me the hostile and adverse element on a silver platter. I sent one more letter. A cease and desist, drafted by an old friend of mine who specialized in property law. It was firm, legally precise, and unambiguous. It gave them 7 days to halt all use of my road. Karen's response was to throw a party for the grand opening of the first 10 cabins and to send an email blast to all HOA members inviting them to use the historic Black Creek Vistas scenic trail, complete with a little map that showed my driveway as the main route. That's when I bought the gate, a 16-foot, heavy-gauge steel farm gate. I installed it myself, sinking the posts 4 feet deep in concrete. I bought the thickest, case-hardened logging chain I could find and a high-security padlock. I waited until the last construction vehicle left on a Friday evening, and then I closed it. I locked it. The next morning, a Saturday, the first of the vacation renters arrived. They were met by a solid steel barrier. Their calls to the rental agent went to a confused voicemail. Their calls to Karen went unanswered. Chaos ensued. By Monday morning, she was at my gate with bolt cutters. And that brings us back to my porch, with my cold coffee, and the quiet satisfaction of a long-laid plan finally clicking into place. She thought she had opened a road. In reality, she had just opened the door to a courtroom. After she left, I didn't call my lawyer. Not yet. The first call I made was to the county sheriff's office, the non-emergency line. I reported a case of trespassing and destruction of private property. I gave the dispatcher my name, my address, and the name of the perpetrator, Karen Peterson. I described the bolt cutters and the chain. I was calm and factual. I mentioned that I had the entire incident on video. The dispatcher informed me that a deputy would be dispatched to take a report later in the day. That was perfect. A police report creates an official, third-party record of the event. It moves the conflict from a private dispute into the public record. It was another sheet of paper for my file. My second action was to go back down to the gate. The maintenance man, in his haste to follow his queen, had left it wide open. I swung the heavy steel panels back into place. The chain was, of course, useless. I went to my workshop and returned with something better. It was a length of grade 100 alloy chain, the kind used for overhead lifting. It was twice as thick as the previous one, with a tensile strength of over 15,000 pounds. Bolt cutters, even large ones, would barely scratch the surface of its hardened steel links. I threaded it through the gate and secured it with a new padlock, this one a disc-detainer model, designed to be pick-proof and drill-resistant. As I clicked it shut, I felt a sense of finality. This was no longer a suggestion. It was a statement. Then, I went back to my desk and got to work. My home office looks out over the valley. Eleanor used to say it was a distracting view for a man who needed to focus on details, but I always found it calming. The first thing I did was upload the video from my phone to a secure cloud server and make 2 backup copies on physical hard drives. I labeled the file with the date, time, and the title, K. Peterson, Criminal Trespass and Property Destruction. Documentation is only useful if it's organized. Next, I pulled out the Karen file. It was thick now, almost 3 inches of paper held together by a large binder clip. I removed the clip and spread the contents across my desk. The petty fines, the threatening letters, my certified mail receipts, the photos of the construction trucks, the expired access agreement from 1997, the HOA's newsletters, her condescending reply to my warning was all there. A 2-year history of escalating aggression and overreach. A narrative written on paper. On paper, she had no case. The problem was that battles like this are rarely fought on paper alone. They are fought in boardrooms and courtrooms where performance and personality can often cloud simple facts. Karen was a master of performance. I was not. I was a man of process and procedure. So, had to build a case so overwhelmingly dull, so meticulously documented, that no amount of theatrics could overcome it. I contacted Sarah, my old paralegal. She had retired a few years after I did. She was sharper at 70 than most lawyers are at 30. I called her and explained the situation. I could hear the excitement in her voice. Sarah loved a good document dive. And HOA president with a God complex and a fraudulent easement claim? She said. Oh, Arthur, this is better than bingo night. I emailed her a summary and a link to the evidence I had already collected. Her job was to start digging into the HOA's corporate filings, their meeting minutes, if she could get them, and, most importantly, the permit applications for the 40 rental cabins. While Sarah went to work on the public records, I focused on the land itself. My grandfather, the surveyor, had taught me that the land itself is the primary document. The fences, the corner markers, the monuments, they all tell a story. He had installed permanent survey monuments at all 4 corners of his property. Back in 1958, they were 3-foot lengths of rebar, driven into the ground, topped with a brass cap stamped with his professional license number. I spent the rest of the afternoon finding them. The one in the northeast corner was hidden under a thicket of rhododendron, but it was there. The brass was green with age, but the numbers were still clear. I took photos of each marker, with a GPS unit in the frame, to show the exact coordinates. I was re-establishing the facts on the ground, creating a fresh record of the lines that had been there all along. The bombshell discovery came from Sarah 2 days later. She called me, her voice tight with controlled glee. Arthur, she said, you are not going to believe this. I'm looking at the site plan they submitted to the County Planning Commission for the cabin development. My heart rate quickened. And? I asked. And, she said, drawing out the word. The plan includes an access and utility easement that follows your driveway perfectly. It's marked as a pre-existing, dedicated easement. They submitted it as a settled fact. They told the county they had a legal right to use your road before they even applied for the building permits. I was silent for a moment, processing the audacity. It was one thing to claim a prescriptive easement in a threatening letter. Well, it was another thing entirely to file a sworn document with a government agency that contained a fraudulent claim. Who signed the application? I asked. The applicant of record, Sarah said, and I could practically hear her smiling through the phone, is listed as the Black Creek Vistas Homeowners Association. The signatory, under penalty of perjury, is its president, one Karen Peterson. I kept the receipts. And this was the biggest one yet. This moved the conflict from the realm of civil dispute into the territory of criminal fraud. She had lied, not just to me, but to the county. She had built her entire 40-unit investment project on a foundation of pure fiction. This was the document that would bring her entire world crashing down. I asked Sarah to send me a certified copy from the county records office overnight. I had a feeling I would need it soon. The sheriff's deputy arrived late that afternoon. He was young, professional, with a calm demeanor that I immediately respected. Karen was waiting for him. She had clearly been watching for his arrival, and met his patrol car at the gate, launching into her performance before he had even fully stepped out of the vehicle. I watched from the porch again as she gesticulated wildly, pointing at the gate, then up at my house, then at the new cabins visible through the trees. Say all? Her voice was shrill, carrying up the hill. A litany of complaints about me. I was unstable, I was a recluse, I was endangering lives, I was holding innocent tourists hostage. It was a masterclass in performative victimhood. I was a masterclass in performative victimhood. The deputy listened patiently, his face impassive. He made a few notes in his little book. Then, he looked up at me and started the long walk up my driveway. Karen trailed him, still talking, providing a running commentary of my alleged villainy. I met him on the patio. "Mr. Miller," he asked. "I'm Deputy Evans." "Arthur Miller," I said, shaking his hand. "Thank you for coming." "I've just been hearing from a Mrs. Peterson," he said with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation. "She's making some fairly serious claims about this road." "I'm sure she is," I said quietly. Karen pushed forward. "He's locked us out," she declared. "This is a public road. We have dozens of guests trapped up there. What if there's a fire? He's putting lives at risk." The deputy held up a hand to silence her, a gesture he performed with weary practice. He turned back to me. "Sir, can you tell me your side of the story?" "I didn't give him a story. I gave him facts, deputy," I said. "This road is my private driveway. It is located entirely within the boundaries of my property. Parcel number 7B4A. I am the sole owner. I have never granted an easement to the homeowners association." I handed him a slim file I had prepared. It contained 3 documents. The first was a copy of my property deed. The second was a copy of my most recent property tax bill, which clearly listed the acreage and showed that I and I alone paid taxes on the land the road occupied. The third was a copy of the county plat map, on which I had highlighted my parcel in yellow and the HOA's property in blue. The white space between them, containing the road, was unequivocally part of the yellow section. And the deputy took the documents and reviewed them in silence. Karen tried to interrupt twice, and twice he gave her a sharp look that silenced her. He was a young man, but he had an old soul's appreciation for paperwork. He spent a full minute looking at the map, tracing the property lines with his finger. He looked up from the papers, then down the driveway, then back at the map. The physical reality matched the documented one perfectly. "This all seems to be in order, Mr. Miller," he said. He handed the papers back to me. Karen was practically vibrating with fury. "Are you kidding me? He's a crazy old man with a photocopier. I'm telling you, we have a prescriptive easement. It's our right." The deputy turned to her, his expression hardening slightly. "Mom, a prescriptive easement is a civil matter. It's something a judge decides. What I have in front of me," he gestured to the papers in my hand, "is a clear deed and a tax record. On paper, this is his property, which means that gate is his gate. And that chain you cut was his chain." He looked back at me. "You have this on video, you said?" "Yes, deputy," I confirmed, stamped. "And you're willing to press charges for destruction of property?" "I am," I said. "I would like it noted in your report that Mrs. Peterson identified herself by name and as president of the HOA. While committing the act, the deputy nodded, making another note. The shift in his demeanor was palpable. He had arrived at a he said, she said dispute, and had found instead a she said, he documented situation. He knew who the reliable narrator was. He turned back to Karen. Her face, which had been a mask of righteous anger, was now showing cracks of disbelief. She couldn't comprehend that her performance had failed, that this uniform symbol of authority was not siding with her. "House?" "Ma'am," the deputy said, his tone now formal and distant. "At this time, this appears to be a civil dispute over access. I cannot force him to open his gate. My advice to you: in the meantime, you are on private property, and the owner has asked you to leave. If you do not, you could be charged with trespassing, and I will be filing a report with the district attorney's office regarding the destruction of the chain." He gave me a crisp nod. "You'll be able to pick up a copy of the report in a few days, Mr. Miller." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving Karen standing on my patio, speechless for the second time in a week. She gave me one last look, a venomous glare that promised retribution, and then she stormed off. The authority figure she had summoned to vanquish me had, instead, validated my position and documented her own crimes. It was a good day for the file. The incident with the deputy seemed to galvanize the community, but not in the way Karen had intended. The story of her public failure spread quickly. The sight of a sheriff's deputy siding with a quiet man on the hill over their loud, domineering HOA president was a crack in the dam of her authority. 2 days later, I got a visitor. It was Mr. Henderson, the retired teacher who had been fined for his garden hose. He was an elderly, gentle man who had lived in Black Creek Vistas since it was first built. He knocked on my door tentatively, holding a worn leather briefcase. "Arthur," he said, his voice quiet, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I heard what happened with Karen and the sheriff." "Not at all, George," I said, ushering him inside. "Please, come in." We sat in my living room and he opened his briefcase on the coffee table. He was nervous, but resolute. "I was on the original architectural review committee, back when the development first started," he began. "I kept records. I kept everything." He pulled out a thin, bound volume. It was the official meeting minutes from 1997 to 2001. His finger, slightly shaky with age, pointed to an entry dated October 1998. The entry detailed the discussion with the original developer about access to the common areas. Now, the developer, in response to a question from Mr. Henderson himself, had stated for the record that the road up the hill was private property belonging to Mr. Miller, and that any access was temporary and permissive, subject to termination at any time. It was there, in black and white. It was the smoking gun that completely obliterated Karen's prescriptive easement fantasy. Their own founding documents confirmed my position. "She bullied everyone into forgetting this," Mr. Henderson said, his voice filled with a quiet, long-simmering anger. "She came in and just rewrote history. People were afraid to challenge her. She'd find them, harass them. I was afraid. Mind him. But when I heard you stood up to her, when I heard the deputy back you, I knew I had to bring this to you. He slid the book of minutes across the table. It's the only official copy. The one in the HOA office mysteriously disappeared a few years ago. Make a copy. Use it. This was the fearful ally, the conscience of the community, stepping out of the shadows. His evidence was invaluable. A voice from the past that spoke a truth Karen had tried to bury. I thanked him profusely, and promised him I would put it to good use. He left my house looking lighter, as if a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. His courage, sparked by my own small act of resistance, was now part of my arsenal. The next piece of the puzzle came from an anonymous email. It arrived in my inbox with the subject line, Black Creek Vistas, Internal Documents. There was no text in the body, just 3 PDF attachments. The first was the HOA's current budget. The second was a record of all legal expenditures for the past year. The third was a copy of the contract they had signed with the company that was managing the cabin rentals. I had my disillusion insider. Someone on Karen's own board had reached their breaking point. The documents were a revelation. They showed that Karen had spent over $50,000 in HOA funds on legal consultations regarding the access road, a fact she had hidden from the residents. The budget revealed that the entire financial stability of the HOA was now dependent on the projected income from the 40 rental cabins. Without that income, the association would be bankrupt within a year. She hadn't just bet her reputation on this project, she had bet the entire community's financial future on her ability to steal my road. The contract with the rental company was even more damning. It contained a clause, personally guaranteed by Karen as HOA president, warranting that the HOA possessed legal, uncontested, and permanent access to the rental units. She had not only lied to the county, she had committed the HOA to a contract based on a fraudulent warranty. When the truth came out, the rental company would have grounds for a massive lawsuit. The coalition was forming. I had the law on my side. I had the physical evidence. I had historical documents from a founding member. And now I had an insider providing me with proof of financial malfeasance and contractual fraud. My little manila folder had grown into a heavy, 3-ring binder, with tab sections for deeds, correspondence, photographs, police reports, and internal HOA documents. It was a monument to methodical preparation. Karen, oblivious to the case being built against her, made one last desperate move. She must have realized that her usual tactics of bullying and bluffing were failing. She escalated. Her lawyer, a man whose flashy website promised aggressive litigation, filed for an emergency injunction in county court. The filing was a work of fiction. It claimed that my gate was blocking the sole designated emergency evacuation route for the upper portion of the development. It painted a terrifying picture of families and tourists trapped by a raging wildfire, unable to escape because of my malicious and arbitrary actions. It demanded a judge order me to remove the gate immediately. This was her final fatal overreach. She was now taking her performance to a formal legal setting. She was putting her lies into a sworn affidavit. My lawyer, a quiet, thoughtful man named Ben Carter, read the injunction filing and let out a low whistle. "She's claiming it's an official evacuation route?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's a very specific, very verifiable claim, Arthur. A bold move." "It's a complete fabrication," I said. "I know," he replied, tapping the document. "And the beautiful thing is, we can prove it. This isn't just a mistake. This is perjury. She just handed us the keys to the whole kingdom." He was right. This act, intended to be a legal sledgehammer to crush my resistance, was just another piece of paper for my binder. It was the last piece I needed. The hearing was set for the following week. It was time for the final confrontation. The courtroom was small and stuffy, smelling of old paper and cheap air freshener. It was packed. Karen had rallied her supporters, a dozen or so residents who either genuinely believed her narrative or were too afraid to oppose her. They sat together on one side of the room, whispering and casting hostile glances my way. On my side sat Mr. Henderson, looking frail but determined, and a few other long-time residents who had quietly offered me their support. Sarah, my paralegal, sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her hand resting protectively on the thick three-ring binder of evidence. The binder was the largest object on the table. It was our tank. Karen was in her element. She was dressed in a sharp, dark blue suit, the picture of a competent and concerned community leader. She conferred with her lawyer in hushed, serious tones, occasionally looking over at the judge with an expression of earnest gravity. It was all a show, of course, but it was a good one. To an uninformed observer, she looked like the voice of reason. I, in my simple tweed jacket, probably looked like the stubborn old recluse she had painted me as. The hearing began. Karen's lawyer, Mr. Vance, stood up. He was slick and polished, with a booming voice that filled the small room. He launched into a passionate opening statement, painting a vivid picture of the danger my gate represented. He spoke of vulnerable families, terrified tourists, and the imminent threat of wildfire in our dry mountain climate. He described the road as a vital artery that I had severed out of spite. He entered Karen's sworn affidavit into the record, the one that claimed the road was a designated evacuation route. It was all emotion, all performance, with very few actual facts. Then, he called Karen to the stand. She walked to the witness box with a solemn dignity, as if accepting a heavy but necessary burden. She swore the oath, her voice trembling slightly with manufactured emotion. Vance led her through a series of rehearsed questions. She recounted her version of events, casting herself as a patient leader, trying to reason with an irrational man. She described her shock and horror at finding the gate locked. She spoke of the community's history, claiming under oath that the road had been used as the primary access to that part of the mountain for as long as anyone can remember. She was a compelling witness. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Esposito, listened impassively, her expression unreadable. When it was Ben's turn to cross-examine, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Ben was the opposite of Vance. He was quiet, his movements economical, his questions short and precise. He approached the witness stand, not with a roar, but with a scalpel. "Mrs. Peterson," he began, his voice barely above a conversational level, "you've testified that this road is a designated emergency evacuation route. Is that correct?" "Yes, that is correct," Karen said, her confidence unwavering. "Designated by whom?" Ben asked. Karen faltered for a fraction of a second. By the county, it's on all the official plans." "It is?" Ben sounded genuinely curious. He walked back to our table and picked up a large, rolled-up document. It was a certified copy of the official county emergency management plan for our district, including the detailed evacuation routes for the Black Creek Vistas area. He had it marked as Exhibit A. He unrolled it and placed it on an easel facing the judge in the witness box. "Mrs. Peterson," Ben said, pointing to the map, "could you please show the court where my client's road is marked as an evacuation route?" Karen stared at the map. Her eyes scanned it desperately. The map was covered in bright red lines indicating primary and secondary evacuation routes. None of them went anywhere near my property. The designated route for her new cabins led out through the main entrance of the HOA, the same as for every other house in the development. Her vital artery wasn't on the map. It didn't exist. It seems to be an older version of the map, she stammered, her first real sign of panic. "This map was certified by the county clerk's office yesterday, Mrs. Peterson," Ben said calmly. "Let's move on. You also filed this site plan with the county when you applied for the building permits for your rental cabins, did you not?" He produced the document Sarah had discovered, marking it as Exhibit B. It was the plan showing the fraudulent easement. "Yes," Karen said, her voice now a whisper, "and this plan, which you signed under penalty of perjury, shows a pre-existing easement on Mr. Miller's property." "Where did you get the information for that easement?" "It's a prescriptive easement," she insisted, falling back on her rehearsed lines. "It's based on historic use." "Historic use." Ben nodded slowly. "I see, Ma." He walked back to the table and picked up another document. "I'd like to enter into evidence, Exhibit C." He handed a copy to the judge and to Karen. "This is a copy of the official minutes of the Black Creek Vistas HOA Architectural Review Committee, dated the 14th of October, 1998. Could you please read the highlighted section aloud, Mrs. Peterson?" Karen's face went white. She stared at the paper as if it were a snake. She saw Mr. Henderson's name. She saw the developer's statement. She saw the words, "Private property belonging to Mr. Miller and permissive use." The room was silent. I can't read it," she whispered. "My glassa, allow me," Ben said gently. He read the passage aloud, his clear, calm voice cutting through the tension in the room. He read the part about my ownership, about the temporary access, about the explicit understanding that there was no permanent right-of-way. As he read, I saw two of the HOA members on Karen's side of the room exchange a shocked look. They had never seen this document. They had only heard Karen's version of history. Ben wasn't finished. He presented the deed, the tax records, the photos of the survey markers, the police report detailing her destruction of my chain. With each new exhibit, he laid another stone on the edifice of her lies. A quiet, methodical dismantling of her entire narrative. He presented the certified letter I had sent and her arrogant, dismissive reply. He established, piece by irrefutable piece, that she knew the road was mine, that she had been warned, and that she had proceeded anyway. The final blow, the moment the mask truly dropped, came when he presented Exhibit G. The internal HOA budget and the rental management contract, provided by my anonymous insider. "Mrs. Peterson," Ben said, his voice still soft, but now with an edge of steel. "Is it not true that the HOA's entire financial solvency is now dependent on the income from these 40 cabins?" Vance shot to his feet. "Relevance? Your Honor," Ben said, turning to the judge. "It speaks directly to motive. Mrs. Peterson didn't file for this injunction out of a concern for public safety. She filed it because she has bet her entire association's future and her own reputation on a project that is fundamentally non-viable without the illegal seizure of my client's property. She lied on her permit applications. She lied in her sworn affidavit, and she is lying to this court right now, not for safety, but for money." "Overruled," Judge Esposito said, her eyes fixed on Karen. "The witness will answer the question." Karen just sat there. Her face, which had gone from confident to panicked, was now completely blank. It was the look of a person whose internal reality has just collided with the external one at high speed. The confident, powerful HOA president was gone, replaced by a small, lost woman who had been caught in a web of her own making. She had no idea. She had built her castle on sand, and the tide of documented truth had just washed it all away. She looked at her lawyer, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring down at his legal pad, already calculating the cost of the disaster. She looked at her supporters, but their faces were now filled with confusion and dawning betrayal. She was utterly, completely alone. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. She denied the emergency injunction with prejudice, meaning Karen could never file it again. In her summary, Judge Esposito stated that the court had found compelling evidence of fraudulent filings with the County Planning Commission and a potential instance of perjury committed before this court. She announced that she was referring the entire matter, including the transcripts of the day's hearing and all the exhibits, to the district attorney's office for a full investigation. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was no longer a civil dispute. It was now a criminal case. Karen seemed to shrink in the witness box. The color had drained from her face. Her lawyer gently touched her arm to guide her down, and she moved like an automaton. The verdict was absolute. The war was over. The paper trail had won. The aftermath was a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of the evidence presented in that courtroom. The district attorney's office launched an investigation into Karen Peterson for perjury and filing false documents. Within a month, she was indicted on 2 felony counts. The news sent shockwaves through the Black Creek Vistas community. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, from which Karen was absent. My anonymous insider, a woman named Janice, who had been the board's treasurer, presented the full financial picture, including the secret legal expenditures and the fraudulent warranty in the rental contract. The rental management company, upon learning of the fraud, immediately terminated their contract and filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the HOA for breach of contract and damages. The owners of the 40 cabins who had bought them based on the promise of rental income filed their own class action lawsuit. The HOA, which Karen had leveraged to the hilt, was suddenly facing financial ruin from 3 different directions: the lawsuits, the loss of all rental income, and the impending legal costs of their president's criminal defense. A recall petition was started for Karen. It received the required number of signatures in less than 48 hours. She was unceremoniously removed as president and from the board. She and her husband put their house up for sale a week later and left town before the first hearing in her criminal case. She pleaded guilty to a lesser misdemeanor charge, paid a hefty fine, and received 2 years of probation. Her reign was over. Her public humiliation was complete. The community was left to pick up the pieces. Under new leadership, with Janice as the new, far more sensible president, the HOA approached my lawyer. They didn't come with threats or demands. They came with a plea. They were facing bankruptcy. My lawyer and I drafted a settlement. It was not punitive, it was practical. They would pay all of my legal fees. They would issue a formal public apology to me in the community newsletter. They would pay a settlement for the year of trespassing and for the damage to my road from the heavy construction traffic. And most importantly, they would sign a legally binding agreement to be filed with the county and attached to every deed in their development, acknowledging that my road was private property and that no resident of Black Creek Vistas had any right of access, permissive or otherwise, forever. They agreed to all terms. The money from the settlement was enough for me to have the entire road professionally regraded and resurfaced. The community began to heal. The draconian rules Karen had instituted were rolled back. The absurd fines were rescinded and refunded. A sense of neighborliness, absent for years, slowly started to return. Mr. Henderson became something of a local hero, the quiet man who had kept the truth safe for 2 decades. He and I started having coffee on my porch every Tuesday morning. We talked about gardening and birds, and never about Karen Peterson. Janice, the new HOA president, would occasionally call me for advice on matters of drainage or property lines, a professional courtesy that was a world away from her predecessor's aggression. The fearful allies and disillusioned insiders had become friends and neighbors. I installed a new gate. It was custom built, a beautiful piece of wrought ironwork that complemented the landscape. It had an electronic opener, to which only I had the remote. It was a symbol, not of defiance but of order restored, a physical manifestation of a line on a map. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit on my porch in the old wicker chair, holding the same ceramic mug Eleanor made, and I look down the long, dark ribbon of my driveway. I think about the nature of ownership. It is a strange concept when you really consider it. To draw a line on the earth and say, "This is mine," it's an act of profound arrogance, and yet, it's the foundation of all our civil arrangements. My grandfather understood that. He drew his lines with chains and transits, marking them with brass caps so they would endure. I defended those same lines with deeds and documents, with photocopies and certified mail. Karen Peterson never understood that. She believed that ownership came from desire, from will, from the force of her own personality. She believed that if she said a thing was true loudly enough, it would become so. She had no idea that the quietest things in the world, the faint type on a 60-year-old deed, the precise language of a surveyor's note, the patient accumulation of paper in a file folder, the most powerful, they are the things that last. The gate at the bottom of the hill is closed, the mountain is quiet again, the air is still. I take a sip of my coffee. The order has been restored, the lines are clear, and at the end of a long and wearying battle, that is a victory more satisfying than any other. It is the deep, long exhale of peace.